Hi everybody, welcome to Boxing Time. On this channel you will learn a lot of news from the world of boxing. So here we go. Promoter Eddie Hearn was pleased with the performance of unbeaten super middleweight contender Diego Pacheco after watching him dispatch the always tough Marcelo Cosiers in the 9th round with a beautiful uppercut to head last Saturday night at the YouTube Theater in Inglewood, California. Hearn says he'd like to give the 22-year-old Pacheco a step up from Cosiers in his next fight, and he would like to match him against the unbeaten Edgar Berlanga in 2025. A fight between the 26-year-old Berlanga and Pacheco might not be realistic next year, as Edgar inked with Matchroom to get the big fights against Canelo Alvarez and Jamie Munguia. Hearn says Berlanga wants those two popular fighters next. Berlanga would likely balk at the idea of fighting Pacheco if Hearn were to ask him to take that fight. He might see it as Hearn using him as a name for Pacheco to become a star. As you can see, the knockouts that Berlanga used to chalk up have disappeared, and he's now forced to go the distance against fighters that talented super middleweights would likely destroy. That's not a good sign. The way that Berlanga has looked in his last 5 fights, he would have problems going up against a tall knockout artist like Diego Pacheco. Berlanga hasn't knocked out anyone since 2020 and has looked vulnerable recently. Cosiers dropped Berlanga in the 9th round of their fight in 2021. Granted, this was a younger, better version of Cosiers than the one we saw against Pacheco, but still, he gave Edgar massive trouble. In Berlanga's other recent bouts, he struggled to beat Jason Quigley and Steve Rolls, getting hit a lot in both contests. Rolls came close to beating Berlanga.
I think Edgar Berlanga against Diego Pacheco is a massive fight in 2024. Of course, Edgar wants the big names, if you like, the Munguias and obviously the Canelo Alvarez's. But if Diego keeps winning, he's going to put himself right in contention.
Berlanga commented on social media last night about Pacheco's fight with Cosiers, saying that he would have knocked out Marcelo in the 2nd round if he fought the same way. He makes a good point. The 32-year-old Cosiers looked like a shell of the fighter that Berlanga fought, showing no speed, punch accuracy, or confidence.
He's number 3 with the WBO. I think he's top 10 with every governing body. When you're looking for opponents, why not? Why not Diego Pacheco? So, he needs a big name next. We had, as I said, a nice crowd in here.
The main problem that Pacheco will have trying to win a title once Canelo retires or vacates them is dealing with David Benavidez, David Morrell. Those guys are on another level to Pacheco, and he won't beat either of them with the way he fought last night. Benavidez will be forced to move up to 175 soon, so he won't be a problem. But Morrell will still be there at 168. It'll end badly for Pacheco if he fights Morrell because he's clearly not on that guy's level, and you can argue that neither is Benavidez.
We're not in a tearing rush with Diego Pacheco. I think the matchmaking, as you said, was perfect tonight. Now we need a step up from Cosiers, but there aren't many steps. There's probably 1-2 more steps before you get to the world champions, and I think that'll work perfectly for us timing-wise.
Former undisputed junior middleweight champion Jermall Charlo has vacated his IBF 154 pounds title rather than defending the belt against his mandatory Bakhram Murtazalev. It was a predictable move for the 33-year-old Jermall, as that would have been a difficult fight for him against the hard-hitting number 1 IBF-ranked Murtazalev and one that wouldn't pay well. Jermall made millions for his fight against Canelo Alvarez on September 30th. And it's believed that he'll sit inactive for an extended period, possibly a year, and wait until a big money fight falls into his lap. Canelo did Jermall a big favor by selecting him for a title defense, saving him from facing his dangerous WBO mandatory Tim Tszyu. The payday that Jermall got from the Canelo fight was essentially a golden parachute retirement type, and he's now got to hang up the gloves or sit and wait to see if the fight with Terence Crawford will happen. If not, Jermall will likely retire, but without officially announcing it. It'll be interesting to see if the WBA is the next sanctioning body to strip Jermall of one of his remaining 2 titles if he chooses not to defend against number 1 Israel Madrimov. It's safe to say the WBC will allow Jermall to hold onto his belt with their organization without pressuring him to defend against number 1 Charles Conwell. Jermall is hoping for a mega fight against Terence Crawford, and that one could happen in 2024 after Bud faces Errol Spence Jr. in a rematch. Crawford initially said he had no interest in facing Jermall after his loss against Canelo, but he's expected to fight him still because he doesn't have any better options for a mega fight. Although Crawford has called out Canelo, there's no interest from the Mexican star in fighting the 36-year-old welterweight, which is understandable because he fights 3 divisions below him, and the matchup would be a lose-lose for Alvarez. Recently, Jermall was stripped of his WBO 154 title after he chose to fight Canelo Alvarez at 168 rather than defend against his #1 mandatory contender, Tim Tszyu, who had been waiting for a year for his mandated title challenge. Murtazaliev is expected to face now #2 IBF Jack Culcade for the vacant IBF junior middleweight title. The 38-year-old German-based Culcade is a 2008 Olympian, with narrow decision losses against Demetrius Andrade, Sergey Derevianchenko, and Maciej Sulecki, after Jermall's recent well-paying, one-sided 12-round unanimous decision loss to undisputed super middleweight champion Canelo Alvarez last September. He commented about wanting to be only involved in lucrative fights moving forward for the remainder of his career. A title defense against the dangerous Murtazaliev wouldn't have made sense for Jermall, especially with his timid performance against Canelo. Murtazaliev is hungry and would have put looking to take Jermall's head off, and he would have had to fight tooth nail to hold onto his IBF, WBA, WBC belts in a fight against this guy. Murtazaliev, who comes from Grozny, Russia, has been fighting mostly obscure opposition during his 9-year professional career, and he's not well known enough for Jermall to make a lot of money fighting. This happens when champions start focusing on business, wanting to choose fighters that will make them the most money rather than realizing that boxing is still a sport. Jermall wants the big paydays, but he can't choose who to fight if he's holding world titles because that's not how it goes. Imagine a sport like the NBA where a team only wants to ignore their schedule and just focus on facing other teams that will pay them the most. It would no longer be a sport. Champions in boxing who want to cherry-pick opposition are ultimately bad for the sport. Sebastian Fundora could once again challenge for the interim WBC title, though not in a bid to avenge his long career defeat. A ruling was made during the 61st annual WBC convention that would allow Fundora to re-enter the interim title mix. It would come versus Serhii Bohachuk in lieu of a previously contracted rematch versus Brian Mendoza, against whom he suffered a stunning 7th-round knockout defeat this past April to abruptly end his secondary title reign. The WBC had the flexibility to make it possible for the undisputed championship. WBC President Mauricio Suleiman stated prior to issuing the divisional ruling, the WBC had the Jermall Charlo Brian Castano fight and ordered the rematch for the undisputed. At that time, the WBC ordered an interim to keep activity for the boxers to have opportunities. Sebastian Fundora won and defended the title. He lost in a dramatic way to Brian Mendoza, and they had a signed contract for a rematch. That rematch did not happen because Mendoza went to Australia to face WBO titleist Tim Tszyu. The WBO accepted Serhii Bohachuk to fight Sebastian Fundora for the interim title. Jermall Charlo remains the lineal WBC, WBA, and IBF champ. He was relieved of his WBO title once he entered the ring for his failed bid to unseat undisputed super middleweight champion Saul Canelo Alvarez on September 30th in Las Vegas. Tszyu was upgraded from interim to full WBO titleist and defended in a 12-round, unanimous decision over Mendoza on October 15th in Broadbeach, Australia. The IBF has since called for Charlo to face its long-overdue mandatory challenger Bakhram Murtazaliev. A purse bid hearing is scheduled for Tuesday. Charlo will not have to worry about pressure from the WBC, who has made it possible for the two-time champ to move about his career free of restriction. Fundora has not fought since his upset loss to Mendoza on April 8th, a fight in which he won every round until he was dropped hard in round 7 and eventually stopped. The loss ended his interim reign, which began exactly 52 weeks prior in a 9th-round stoppage of Erickson Lubin in one of the best fights of 2022. Ukraine's Bohachuk has won 5 in a row since a March 2021 upset 8th-round stoppage defeat to Brandon Adams. The Tom Loeffler-promoted contender has yet to go the distance through 24 pro bouts. The loss to Adams marked the only time he was extended beyond the 6th round in his boxing lifetime. A date was not set for the approved and ordered interim title fight. However, the winner could be met with a mandatory challenger of their own. Subscribe. Please like and comment. This is very important for the development of the channel. See you later.